We're ready to go, Scott.
Good evening once again. We're here back at the Barbershop. We're happy that we're here in April and we're getting ready to close out into our first full year of the Barbershop. We're closing in, but this is a really special month that we're having a conversation, and we have some great experts that are on. We're going to be talking about the Denim Day events that's going on starting tomorrow, and we're also going to be talking about men, and we really want to hear what men have to talk about, which is our topic tonight, about gender-based violence. That is something that happens very often around the country, and a lot of times we don't talk about it, whether it's just same-sex gender-based violence that happens on, or it's men having violence against women, or even sometimes women's violence against men. It goes a lot of different ways of how it happens, and we want to get a chance to talk about it and hear your opinion. But once again, we have some really good experts from around the city and that we're excited about that we have in the Barbershop today. But first, I'm gonna bring my co-host in, Jerry Hippolyte. He's gonna help me, assist me. And we have a co-host tonight also because Mike Bobbitt was not able to join us, but I think he's gonna be close on the sideline. So he may jump in, or I know he's probably listening, and we may have to just tell him to tap in if we get too heated. But hey, Jerry, how you doing, brother?
I'm good. I'm good to be a part of the Brotherhood. Another great day at the Barbershop. Just thumbs up. I want to make sure you guys can hear me. Sounds about right. Awesome, awesome. So again, just like Scott said, Jerry Hippolyte, Deputy Director at DYCD, and I get the privilege to bring in our co-host, right, who is a youth prevention training advisor, as well as part of the Mayor's Office to end domestic and gender-based violence. It's my pleasure to bring in Alvaro Pinzo. You want to come in and say a little something about yourself, Alvaro?
Thank you, Jerry, and thank you, Scott. And yeah, welcome everyone. This is really great to be here with y'all. Yeah, I've had the pleasure to participate in a few of these, and every time I learn something new, and it's all part of the practice, right? And having these conversations in your natural way, in your own voice. And so I'm happy to be here and do it again.
Great. So Alvaro, why don't you introduce our first, oh no, I'm sorry. I'm gonna, Jerry, why don't you introduce your first guest, and then I'll do the second one, and Alvaro, you'll do the third, okay? Yeah, Jerry.
Awesome. Yeah, you got it. So now, there's nothing like the Barbershop having real talk, and one of those people who's going to bring that up is our Uptown coordinator, part of the RISE project, Altabar Hudgens. If I said your name wrong, please forgive me. I'm in the Barbershop, so we get cuts. So if you could just come and say a little something about yourself, Al.
You definitely got it right. I appreciate that. A lot of people don't get it right in the first try, so thank you so much. Thank y'all so much for having me first and foremost. So my name is Altabar Hudgens, like Jerry has said. I have been, for most of my adult life, I have been doing work around intimate partner violence or gun violence, whether it be in a facilitated sense or in a peer leadership sense. I'm only 27, so my adult life isn't that long, right? But I'm very grateful to be in this space. Q, I share space with you regularly. I don't tell you this often, but I want you to know that I'm always grateful when I get to be in space with you. It's always an honor. Mr. Bunch as well. This is my first time being in a space like this with you. And I remember I did my first call of mentoring, and one of my coworkers was just shouting your praises over and over and over again. But really quickly, the work that I do now is I work with the RISE Project. And in the RISE Project, the work we do is around intimate partner violence. We want to work to change the way that people intervene when intimate partner violence is happening. One way we seek to do that is by working directly with people who cause harm, because so many times the first time people get services around accountability, growth, change, when it comes to causing harm, is when an arrest is made or a court is brought into place. And unfortunately, that usually doesn't happen until there's either physical violence or a fatality. So at RISE, we want to make sure that we're intervening well before it gets to that point. And thank you again so much for having me.
Thank you, Al. And I have the pleasure of bringing in, this executive director, this heavy brother. Some of y'all know him by the name of Q. I love him. He's been doing this work for many, many years. He's been fighting this fight for a long time, and he does an outstanding job. He's from an organization that he's been, I don't know how many years, but he has put it on the map. He's a world-renowned speaker. I know he's spoken in many different places around the country. I'm glad that he's a brother in the work that we're doing here in New York City. And I'm going to turn it over to, as I know that everyone in the New York City knows, as Q. Take it away, Q.
Indeed. Thanks, Scott. It's a pleasure and an honor to be part of the Barbershop Roundtable with you distinguished brothers. And I hate to say it, man, I've probably been doing this work as long as Al Tabar's been alive. I'm getting close to that. Me and Ted, So, and thanks, Scott. It's been a long time since the Forestdale days, and and Al and I are always chatting it up, either through a training workshop, IG Live. We're going to be on the IG Live Thursday night, so you can check us out, talking about similar topics. And you know what? And it's great to be back in a barbershop. I don't even know if Ted knows this, but like when I first started doing this work, I used to run batterers groups in barbershops after hours. And so a lot of the, male socialization and all forms of masculinities take shape and form in barbershops. So it's great to be back in this virtual barbershop. Thanks for inviting me, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
All right, I think it's my turn. I'll take it away. I have the pleasure of introducing Mr. Ted Bunch, and I want to second some of my colleague Altabar's words in that, I've been able to experience the A Call to Men Institute. They call it the Learning Institute, and that's exactly what it is. 2 days of a lot of learning and unlearning. Ted is Chief Development Officer at A Call to Men, which just provides so many opportunities for men to get together and to have these kinds of conversations. So I'll let Ted say a little more about himself.
Good evening, brothers. I'm so happy to be here with you all. Thank you, Alvaro, for that. And thank you, Q, for sharing all that with me, man. You and I have been doing this for a long time together. So it's always great to be in that space for you, man. I really respect and admire your work. And Scott, your leadership is wonderful around all these things around New York City that you're doing. Really appreciate you. And these young brothers, man, Jerry and Altabar, great to see you and to share this time with you. Now, I don't know who's older, Scott or myself, but in the barbershop, whoever's the oldest, that OG, right? Brothers started calling me OG. I'm like, OG, Pops. What you mean, Pops? Right? So, whether we're right or we're wrong, we're always right. Right? Okay. So y'all said, yeah. You're right. Even though, we ain't always right. So I'm just saying for our conversation, cut me some slack. So I know it may not look like I'm in the barbershop, y'all, but I am. All right. I'm next door. I'm between the daycare center and the the little bodega, as well as the storefront church. I'm right here. So you don't see my background, but I'm in the barbershop with these brothers. I'm really happy to be here with y'all. Thank you.
Thank you, Ted, and thank you, everybody. So, let's just go ahead and jump right in this. As men, we have I don't know, maybe it's a persona, it's just something about us. And I know that we're supposed to be protectors. That's one of our things that we're supposed to be. Men, we're supposed to be protectors in our families, in our communities, in our neighborhoods. That's something as a role as a male that we're supposed to somewhat kind of understand or grow into it. We don't expect young guys to be able to understand that right away. But as wisdom kicks in, we're supposed to know and be able to help protect our communities and our families in different ways. But a lot of times, often, it doesn't really happen. And we allow violence to happen and get away with it. So the first thing I want to just kick off, and I want to dissect this term about not domestic violence, I want to say gender-based violence. So I want to start with gender-based violence, and let's break that down and get the people to understand what is gender-based violence first. And then we're going to talk a little deeper about it. What does it mean to us as men, and what we should be doing about it? So anybody who wants to start, we want to talk about it. And just tell me, when you hear the word or the term, or maybe you all are more expert than I am, when you hear gender-based violence, go ahead from there. Anybody? Don't tell me I jumped in the deep end too deep already.
Nah, yeah, I know we in the barbershop, so I know we couldn't start off that deep, especially knowing that there's a lot. I love the term gender-based violence because it, though we always hear about violence, domestic violence with women, there's a lot of stuff that happens with men too. So hearing the perspective from the barbershop, I'm gonna take a pause real quick just to break the ice. What are your thoughts on just the term, or at least break it down for everyone listening?
For me, it's funny. It's funny, right? I try not to use the word funny when talking about the term, but it's funny because I used to work at NGBV with Alvaro before, and I was there when they made the shift from being OCDV, which was the Office to Combat Domestic Violence, and then it changed to the Office to End Gender-Based Violence. So it was really a time in my life where I'm like, okay, why are we changing it? What does it mean? You know what I mean? So for me, I feel like the term gender-based violence, at least to my understanding, as the word was changing in the work that I was doing, as it went from being titled one thing to another, my understanding of gender-based violence is that it is basically this umbrella term, right? It's just this word, it's this catch-all word that, for me, when I was working at NGBV, it was this catch-all word that allowed us to work with more people. It allowed us to access more people. It allowed us to support more people, right? So it went from just being, we work with domestic violence. So we work with domestic violence. We work with sexual violence, we work with intimate partner violence, family violence, elder abuse, right? All these different areas that we might not have been touching before because there was a bigger umbrella to carry it. And to your point about gender-based violence and you know what I mean, like it feeling a little different than like the term violence against women, because it creates a space for to have this conversation about like violence that happens against men, that's all kind of perpetuated from the patriarchy. So I appreciate the term in that way, and the fact that it allows us to have these conversations in a more broader way, because a lot of times when I have these conversations with men about intimate partner violence, and we get to the point where we're talking about like, and this is what happened, and God forbid we're doing a scenario where the person experiencing harm is a woman and the person causing harm is a man, and then we get into well, you know what she should do it, and he and all the men like, wait a minute, what about when we experience harm? Every time they talk about every time they talk about experiencing harm, we always left out of the conversation as if that we're unable to be harmed. And that is a space that kind of backtracks the conversation. So anytime I'm in a space where I'm able to say anybody could be harmed, right, and anybody has the capacity to cause harm, it opens the space for more conversation, and it makes it easier for us to dissect the patriarchy, because it invites men into the conversation in a way that they might not have felt invited in a different way.
I'll chime in a little bit. I heard a little bit. I'm having some audio problems, so I apologize if I'm repeating anything. But I think, like you mentioned, it's an umbrella term, and it's part of the like international language. You know, like the United Nations kind of coined the term gender-based violence. And then, you know, one of the problems with gender-based violence, as is domestic violence and other forms of like these terms and labels that we use, once you say it, you automatically think about, you know, a particular gender or one type of person. So, you know, gender-based violence, you know, typically here in the US, here in New York City, internationally, is typically, even though it's a broad term for multiple genders, you typically think about violence against women, I think, as you mentioned, Al-Tabar. So, you know, the language is, you know, it's as broad as it is, we kind of yield to when we talk about, you know, domestic violence, intimate partner violence, we talk about, you know, violence typically in a heterosexual relationship, a man and woman relationship. So that's why like we kind of moved away from domestic violence in a lot of formats, although it's the most known term, right? But we really talk about intimate partner violence and intrapersonal violence as well. But so, and I would just add like the gender-based violence is really so broad that you can include, you know, gun and gang violence in there. You could, you know, multiple forms of violence. State violence is, you know, fits nicely in that as well when it's, you know, systems or policies are used against one particular gender or not. And, you know, so I just kind of want to add that to that excellent answer to Al.
Yeah, all y'all have said a lot, and just to build on what your point, Q, is that, you know, there isn't a perfect term. We just don't have a perfect term, but gender-based violence says a whole lot more than what domestic violence said. And it's much more inclusive. Even when we talk about gender equity, we're not just talking about women equity, but we're talking about the queer community having equity. So that's gender-based. Gender-based violence makes us think about not just violence of men toward women, but towards Black trans women, right? So that's based on gender. When we talk about discrimination or abuse toward someone who's LGBTQ, transgender, non-conforming, that violence is gender-based because that's where the discrimination or the harm is coming from, that homophobia and that heterosexism. So when we talk about gender-based violence, I really see that as the best term we have currently. And I did want to say also, it does include where we talk about men being victims, even though it doesn't compare to the violence that men perpetrate against women. So I don't want to give the impression that it does, but I do want to say to any man experiencing that we would say the same thing that we would say to a woman, is that if you can leave that relationship, leave that relationship. And, so I just want to kind of put that out there, that no one should anyone who's in an abusive relationship should do their best to get out of that relationship. And no, it's not that easy. When we look at domestic violence, it takes at least 7 times before a woman who's a victim does. But that has a lot to do with resources. Women who have money leave, right? And oftentimes men in that situation, they may not have the same dynamics that are working against them. Alvaro, what do you think? What are your thoughts?
I mean, I echo a lot of what's been said, because I think for the most part, it's still the case that if you just say the word gender, I think a lot of folks' minds go to women. Gender means, women, girls, right? And so it's like we've erased sort of a huge chunk of the population, which is everyone else, pretty much who also has a gender or identifies as gender non-conforming. And what's interesting, so you brought in, Ted, you were bringing in the piece about transgender and gender non-conforming folks. One of the things that makes gender-based violence as a term more inclusive is that it actually catches all that, right? It's violence that can be perpetrated based on what you think about my gender. You don't even have to be accurate, right? It's based on how I'm expressing my gender, right? And maybe you think that's not the way a person that looks like me should be expressing gender, and so that triggers some, right? So it's like, so it really catches a lot of that. And if you used, some of the terms like transphobia, right? Misogyny, it catches all that. And so I think it's a term that's more inclusive. I also think, unfortunately, and I know this year we're talking a lot about systems, right? As far as Denim Day is looking at what can systems do, what systems are not doing. I think, unfortunately, a lot of the systems and organizations still, however, focus primarily on the heterosexual relationships and the violence that occurs there, right? Even though the gender-based violence is calling for more inclusion. So I think there's some work to do there, but I agree with what you all said. I think it is a term that is moving us in that direction.
If I could just add a little bit to that. I think that's important because we have to, just speaking like, I do a lot of work internationally. I know Ted does some as well. And like when we think about these UN bodies that come up with all this language for whatever the treaty may be or whatever the doctrine may be, like these words are not enough, right? So I remember I was in a meeting talking about gender-based violence. And then there was a move to even change it even more so to kind of be more inclusive of male-on-male violence in relationships and things of that nature. And this woman from Fiji was like, you know what, we could talk about this language all day, but for me to describe to someone in her community what one word gender-based violence means, it's about 3 or 4 paragraphs of conversation, right? So we have to kind of get to a point where at the core of it, you know, of all these different isms, and same thing with race. When we think about race, we typically think about racism, we think about Black men, but, you know, Black women and women of color are impacted by it in the same ways. When we think about, you know, domestic violence, it's typically, you know, women. So we have to kind of like move beyond the terminology and break this down and speak to people in a language they can understand. So at the core of it is power and control in your relationship, gaining it or maintaining it, and using different methods and tactics to get that, right? So I think a lot of it is important that, you know, and we may use this language now, but when we're out in the communities and doing trainings, we break it down so people can really understand. I think that's really important.
No, I think that's powerful. Just I'm sorry, go ahead, Scott.
Well, Q, you said something really powerful, and you talk about power and control. And I want to stick, first of all, the issues we have as men, because we have a lot of power and control of how we deal with each other, you know? And yes, I do want to get to our behavior with women, but once again, I think we have to, at least for my seat right now, I think we have to understand power and control of each other, because it's for some reason, men, we want to play king of the hill. We want to be on top of the hill by ourselves, and we don't work in support of each other. And I think that may be one of our problems, because we're not socialized to work together. We're socialized to try to be the ultimate by myself. Does that make sense to anybody?
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely.
No, I think you hit in a big point. Actually leads to where I was coming from. So starting with Scott's point about just that hierarchy that typical men may have, just to throw out some stats, right? 1 in 6 men are like sexually abused, right? 1 in 4 men go through domestic violence themselves, are the victim of that, right? Even in curating some of the questions, one of the questions that we wanted to like present to the panel, I'm trying to write this down, was how can men be better advocates to women, even the mindset. And I actually want to pull that back and reframe it and say, how can we be better advocates to each other, for each other, on just gender-based violence? Like, what are some ways we can be better advocates, knowing what Scott just said, where just sometimes certain men may have the tendency to just want to, this is where the buck stops, or just not have that level of emotional or even social transparency because of the stigma and the silence behind it. How can we, one, be inclusive, and then 2, be better advocates to like be able to catch it in its tracks and support us when we're in it? So I throw that to the team, whether Q, you want to take that, or Al.
Go ahead, Al. I'll chime in. Or you want me to go? Either way.
Bear with me. I had the wrong button on the phone. I moved somewhere. I was paused for a second. But I will say that Scott touched on something really valuable when he spoke about like that thing about being at the top of the hill by yourself, right? And I think that not only do we live in like a patriarchal society, we live in like a capitalist society, right? And in a capitalist society, the value of a person is based on how much you have, how much you can attain, how much you can get, right? And when we're talking about getting the most, and we're talking about an individual, a society that's individualistic, is all these things that come out to like, okay, well, if you're the leader, that means you're gonna have the most, that means you're gonna get the most, that means nobody's gonna be able to stop you from getting the most. And the way that we teach men to be leaders, to get the most, to maintain the most, is through being the strongest. And we teach that strength is something that's separate from womanhood, and you know what's next to womanhood, being emotional. So we teach men all these things about being separate from emotion and gaining and gaining and gaining, and that's how you become the leader. And I think that one thing that we can do to advocate for each other is reteach what leadership means, and reteach who can be a leader, and move towards the concept that a leader is somebody who's supporting their team, right? And a team can be made up of leaders, and we could all be we can all be in leadership positions together, both men when we talk about advocating for men, right? And we can be leaders that are like emotionally compassionate and all of these things. But when I say we can be leaders together, like yes, men can be leaders together, but also understanding that there's space for women in leadership as well. That isn't just based on the space of teaching us how to be better for them, but like being leaders in the sense of, pardon me, being leaders in the sense of being able to hold that same spot that we hold when it comes to being respected and protected, and we stand alongside them and making sure that they're respected and protected.
Wow.
Thanks for that, Alex Barr. I agree with all of that. And I'll just kind of offer up that, the idea of, I think men, how we're kind of socialized. Part of the problem is how we're socialized to be men, right? And it's like, part of it is like what you talked about, part of our socialization to be men sometimes comes at the cost of women, right? But it also comes at the cost of other men in terms of like how we fit, how masculine we are. And it's, and it's not just like toxic masculinity is like the most popular term right now, but we've used in the past super masculine, hyper masculine, whatever forms it is. It's definitely unhealthy, right? And so a lot of it is like how we position ourselves amongst each other. We're very competitive with each other. That's part of it. And that comes from like, this idea that we have to be leaders on top all the time. And I think it's also this idea that, this, I'm trying to frame it like this idea that when we look at violence, right, and going back to gender-based violence, when you think about even all forms of violence, because if you scratch the surface, you'll find a man standing there somewhere, right? All forms of violence, gun violence, military violence, everything. You'll find some guy making a decision there. So I think part of it is that we have to recognize, to your point, Jerry, most of the violence that happens, that male violence pretty much impacts men almost 3 times more than it impacts women, right? And the part that does impact women is gender-based violence, it's domestic violence, it's other forms of violence and systemic violence that enforces the idea that men are more important than women. But so we have to kind of look at that and like, what about the way we're socialized around violence that impacts men as well? So we got to figure out ways to, I think advocate on one level, but we always have to ask this question of, we need to be co-conspirators together. We need to really kind of figure this out and have conversations like this barbershop. I've been running a men's roundtable for about 12 years where we're in this space where we're talking about these issues, about how can we work together. And on the top of this call, we talked about the brother who was sick and you kind of reached out to him in the hospital, like men's health and wellness, right? And dealing with also our trauma that, is usually as a result of each other. So really checking and making sure that we are whole, we are well, mental health, spiritual health, emotional health, and even dental health. I always like to add that, we're not going to the doctors, we're not taking care of ourselves. And I think the healthier we are as men, the more healthy we'll be in relationships with men and definitely with women, and then all others who identify in the ways that they identify in terms around their gender and orientation. So I think it's important that we kind of look at that male violence is really at the center of all of these things. And we are very violent towards each other, competitive towards each other, and we're fighting for crumbs, right? In terms of like privilege, entitlement, expectations. I have male privilege in my community. I might not have white male privilege, but I have male privilege, and that also perpetuates our communities as well. And then I'm always, growing up, we talk about bullying and power and control over someone else and bullying someone to make yourself feel better. We got to look at, putting somebody else down does not make us feel better. It just keeps 2 people down instead.
You're killing it right there. I put that in the sense of one of the people I follow. So I'm the mental health ambassador in my unit, and one of my roles in DYCD. One of the studies that I got was from Dr. Robert Kelly. And basically, young boys from 0 to 6 share the same like emotional patterns with young girls. And by 6 years old, he basically curated and added on a study of the male emotional funnel system, and it showed that by 6, like as you were talking about men and how they're groomed in society, really start showing the only emotions they start building on is pride, contentment, and anger. And so when we talk about that, the way we're raising up what masculinity look like at the cost of violence and everything that happens, I actually want to give this to Ted. What is a healthy way for masculinity to look like as it relates to curating this thing called gender-based violence?
So the first thing is, and I just want to really, you all are right on point with all of this. What you all have been describing is something that we would call the man box, right? The term that identifies the limitations placed on what it is supposed to be a man and the restrictions and expectations that come from that mindset, right? And we pass that down to our boys. And that's why at 6 years old, the boys stop being able to be their full authentic selves, right? Like we allow our daughters to, but by the time our boys going into 1st grade, kindergarten, we've already taught him how to stop crying by saying, man up, suck it up, stop all that. I don't want to hear it. I'll give you something to cry about. All of those kinds of things. I can't understand you when you're crying. All those things that tell our boys to stop crying, which also tells them to stop feeling. They don't know the difference. And as a result, we don't develop the language needed to be not only our full authentic selves, but to be productive and successful. Where suicide is about 3.5 times higher among men than among women, also higher among male identified youth than female identified youth, right? And then even higher among our queer and questioning youth, because they're being punished even more so by this man box, because that glue that keeps the man box together is homophobia. And I also want to say for our audience, I'm thinking about men who might be listening to this, and we all have talked about this before, that this is not an indictment on manhood, but an invitation to men, right? And it's not about calling men out, but calling men in. And so these expectations about this man box, what it is to be a man, being aggressive, dominant, being in control, not showing emotion, all of those things, we die 6 years earlier than women. To some of the points that you all talked about. We're not going to ask for help because asking for help is a sign of weakness. We're not going to be vulnerable. So even when we're experiencing things with anxiety and depression, which is off the charts for men, we don't go get help because we think we're supposed to suck it up. So that's where the suicide comes in, and then hurt people. So now we're taking it out on our community, on people who look like us, on our loved ones, in our relationships. So we pass this down to our boys. So this is a really important piece, man. And if I could just talk a little bit more, just really about this, that we're supposed to be powerful and dominating, fearless, and in control all the time, right? I can see a man who I see his world is coming. He just got kicked out of the house, lost his job. And I say, how you doing, man? He said, I'm good. Like, no, man, you ain't, right? But we don't even feel like we can say that. So I'm gonna pass it back over to you all. But I do want to just say that we have to allow our boys to be their full authentic selves. We have to allow them to cry, to share their emotion. We talk about healthy manhood. It's really about embracing and expressing our full range of emotion and allowing our boys to do the same. Do not say things that denigrate women, girls, or the LGBTQ gender nonconforming community. And that means in things like, you know, whether it's saying to your son, you got to throw harder than you throw like a, or when you're, or because girls throw just fine, or whether you're with your boys and you're saying things, you know, you're calling him a this or calling him a that based on women's body parts or based on a woman or based on a gay man or whatever. Like all of that's part of that continuum. That's part of the gender-based violence that we're talking about. But as Q mentioned before, most violence is done by men, but most men are not violent, but we're silent about those that are. And that's as much of the problem as the violence and abusive. That's what we're speaking to here. It's not about intervening when something has happened. It's about going upstream to prevention so it doesn't happen in the first place.
So Ted, with that said, one thing that kept coming into my spirit, it may be somewhat ingrained that we hate ourselves, and that's why we take it out on others. Does that kind of make sense? And maybe in our brainwash, in our DNA or something like that?
I'll turn it over to my my panel here, I feel like, I think that, again, we don't develop the language to talk about what's going on with us, and we don't feel like we can. So we're conditioned to be dominant and aggressive in resolving conflicts with each other and in our relationships. So I don't think it's really, I know some narcissistic, very self-centered people who love themselves who are going out and treating people very poorly. Now, there is something that we would call internalized response to oppression, which is like, if you look like me, I don't value you, right? But that's based on this construct of racism also. So, but I would love to hear from some of the other men.
Admiral, jump in there.
Oh, go ahead.
I saw you unmuting yourself. I was gonna let
Good,
you
huh?
go. Go for it. You got that thought. Go.
It's so interesting that you say that, right? Because the other day we were doing an event. We were in Brownsville. Roz was in Brownsville. If I'm being honest, right, I was a little upset because it's like, yo, it's Saturday and I'm an Uptown coordinator. But that's not the point, right? We ended up in Brownsville doing the work together. And whenever we have these events, it's always, it was a big community unified Brownsville event. And whenever we have these events, it's always, like younger guys or younger people just kind of staying clear of the event, but being present because it's their community. And I went over to the side and I said, let me engage it was about 4 young guys, 4 young men. I was like, let me engage them, let me talk to them. And as I started talking to them, 3 of them admitted to engaging in violence against their partners. One said that's something, physical violence. One of them said that's something that he never did. And he actually talked to them to be accountable around changing these behaviors and not being violent. One of them said that, he doesn't use physical violence anymore because of his one friend that told him to be accountable. But to go back to the question I was asked about, the kind of this thing about self-hate, one of the young men started telling his what happened, right? He was like, my girl, she cheated on me. So I went there with her, I went physical with her, right? And I asked him, I said, so you was heartbroken? And it came over his face like, I can't say that. I can't say I was heartbroken, right? But eventually through like the I guess a little bit of the coaching of the young man that was there as well, there was like, yeah, like why wouldn't you be heartbroken? I'm like, that's a perfect thing to feel in the moment like that. Of course he was heartbroken, right? It's easier for them to say another man is stolen than for them to say that they had felt the feeling. And the thing that I was saying to him is like, so many times as men, particularly young men, we feel feelings, we feel our emotions, but we feel like we got to be on gangster time. And because we got to be on gangster time, we can't express whatever emotion it is that we feel. And so we got to resort to whatever tool we've been taught we can have. And if that tool is physical violence, that's where you're going. And I don't know if the word I would use is self-hate, but I would definitely use the word insecurity, right? And not being able to say like, oh, I'm insecure that if somebody sees me being heartbroken and being sad and being hurt by another person, particularly somebody who's not a man, particularly somebody who's a woman, I'm insecure and I'll be embarrassed and I don't want them to see me like that. And it's the way I need them to see me. So self-hate, maybe not, but I definitely say it's a level of insecurity that leads to a lot of violence caused by men.
Yeah, Scott, when you asked that question, I about do men hate themselves? What I tried thinking about it, and my gut response was like, no, absolutely not. And then I was like, well, let me see what the opposite of that would look like, right? If men love themselves. And then what I immediately ran into was the man box once again, because what happens if a man takes too much care of themselves, right? And, it's like you're supposed to like be clean, but you're not supposed to be like, take too much care of yourself, because then that you're going to get a homophobic remark thrown at you, right? Because that's not what a man does. Like you're too pretty, or you're too organized, or you're too pressed, everything's too buttoned up, right? And so it's like the opposite of that would look like taking care of yourself, pampering yourself, giving your body what it needs, all that, having your alone time, do all the things that you like to do that make you feel good, and perhaps, Altabar, the things that make you feel more confident, right? But then you also have to be careful with that, because all the other rules, right, and all the rigid norms are telling you, don't do too much of it, right? Because you can experience some form of violence as well, right, if you do that. But similarly, I think early on in my career, right, when I started hearing remarks about in like trainings or workshops or whatever, men would be like, well, what about men, right? Like, women abuse men as well. We're talking about intimate partner violence, but you keep talking about how women are survivors and whatnot. And then, some men used to think, well, like, it's men are conditioned this way, or not conditioned. Men are this way is what I used to hear a lot. Men are inherently essentially violent, right? And then again, my gut reaction to that was like, well, no, that can't be the answer. So let me look at the other side of that, right? And then that's when I learned about, right, like what a collective socialization can do to a particular gender, right? If we're all trying to follow a similar code, then what it ends up doing, right, is just it limits us in all those ways. So I don't think men are particularly violent, but like Altabar was saying, if that's one of the main tools that you've always known, anger, aggression, physical force, whatever it might be, you're going to turn that into violence in the moments probably that you feel the most insecure, right, or heartbroken or sad. Those are the moments you're going to go for your main tools that you know the best, and those are anger, lash out, use my hands. So it's like, so no, it's not inherent, but that's the training you got. So in the moment, you go to the training, right? You know what's familiar.
So guys, I want to start moving into the next segment of this. And I want to talk about, once again, how we show up for our women, and because, we're talking about the whole thing, we're talking about gender-based violence, but there is a portion of us as men, once again, and I know there's some ladies out there that say, we may show up for the immediate women in our families or in our circles or in our village, but we don't show up for all women. So what is that about? Now we're all good brothers out here. We're here and we say, we respect women, we'll do things for women, we'll do this. But do we really do it?
Yeah, I think we've been talking about this for quite a long time, and it's like women, and and I do this in the context of generally, but then also focusing on, like, from my experience in my community, Black and brown women, right, are very unconditional, right? Unconditional about their love. And it's ultimately, like you said, Alvaro, it's about love on a lot of levels. It's, and then men, because of our privilege, entitlement, and all these other things that come along with that, we are very conditional, right? We are very conditional about who we galvanize our support around. And I'm just thinking about in the moment we're in right now, right? We had this, a beautiful verdict in the George Floyd case, or the Derek Chauvin case, right? And long time coming, in terms of how we, in this work, how we define what accountability is, might be a little bit different than what we kind of see this case to be in terms of accountability and justice, but nevertheless is a step towards, right? And then within the same day, Micaiah Bryant is, killed by the police. And so immediately there's, when we talk about George Floyd, we talk about abolition of the system. The system does not work, or the idea that the system works exactly the way it's supposed to work, right? Where it like suppresses and marginalizes and oppresses people, particularly people of color, queer folks, poor people, et cetera, et cetera. But then within that same day, right, we're already making excuses for how this young woman, a young girl, actually, this young 16-year-old girl was murdered by the police. We're already kind of justifying these systems that we always are against when it comes to Black men, right? And in terms of murder and death. And we're already saying, oh, they were within their right. And we have to look at why we're saying that. One, because this was a young Black girl. She was big-bodied. She was, skin tone, all of these issues. And she was living in foster care. So people are, and men, Black men in particular, and and I work a lot with them in roundtables in different communities. They're not jumping on the bandwagon of the police should not have murdered her and the system is incorrect. So we have to kind of look at, why is it that we pick and choose as men when our sisters are on the line, even when we are not, despite the gender of the person that happened, for young boys, young girls, queer folks, young queer folks, trans people, they're out there unconditionally, right? And I think about my mom, and she just passed away a few months ago. And I just think about how she taught us to kind of to look at, treating women and girls as like gold, right? And she said, treat women and girls like gold the same way I treat you like gold, right? So so we have to kind of take on those same attitudes. So, and I think it's really important that we look at the conditionality of men, what drives us, what makes us stand with or stand for in the same ways that women are standing for us. And that's what it's about. It's not about to protect you. I got this. You can't handle yourself. Let's stand together and figure out how can we work this out together. So we got to be really, careful about how we say protect women, because they're really protecting us. It has to be kind of like a mutuality piece. So I just wanted to kind of add that to the conversation. But I think you all, Ted, I know you want to jump on this.
Yeah, because that's it. You talk to anybody, you talk to any youth that you work with, ask them who protects you more, your mom or your dad? Who provides for you more, your mom or your dad? Oh, can any woman raise no man? They doing it every day.
Right.
Somebody got to do it. I'm just saying. Now, there's a lot of brothers. I'm one of them. I see brothers on here who have children who take care of their kids. But I'm just saying, that's part of that whole thing around this. How we view women as having less value, right? And if I could just say, as horrible as Micaiah's death was and that shooting was, what I also saw was a Black man there kicking that young woman on the ground before the shot even got. So I'm like, there's a brother right there who could have said, hey, hold up, y'all, we're not gonna do this. So that's where our focus needs to be too, is what are we doing or what aren't we doing to really have ownership of who we are and our community. Not ownership in a possessive way, but in I'm supposed to do something. And so, I really think that's an important piece. I mean, our country, we're all taught, no matter what your race or ethnicity is, as a man in a patriarchal society, that we're supposed to be responsible for in this construct now. The women in our lives, the children in our life, but if women are being harmed elsewhere, that's on some other brother, that's on some other man, that ain't on me. I'm taking care of mine. Where we have to change that. It has to be about our shared humanity, and that every daughter, Micaiah, I'm blocking the name of the brother, the young boy who was killed in Chicago. I'm sorry, I forgot.
Oh, Toledo.
Right? Yeah, Toledo. This brother's out here at 1 o'clock in the morning, whatever time it was. We need to take responsibility for these kids. And I know that many of you work with gangs, and I remember my man Juan Ramos, who you all know. I learned something early on with Juan, with his work with gangs. He said, Ted, kids join gangs for a good reason. They may not do good stuff all the time, but they want family, they want belonging, and most of the time they're looking for a male to get affirmation and validation from. And that person is in that community recruiting, or however it's done. But I just wanted to bring that point up because you said a lot there, Q.
If I could, before we move on, I just wanted an example, going back to the question, I do this exercise, and my team, my trainers do this exercise as well. And we ask this question, who is a woman you respect and why, right? And I always ask the question, who's a man you respect and why first, to your point, Ted. And we always talk about, I respect Martin Luther King for, who he was, or I respect this kind of prominent leader or business leader or, whatever that's really important, male. And then I ask the same question about who's a woman you respect and why. And we usually get the same things. My mom, my grandmother for raising me, for taking care of me, for washing my dishes, cooking for me, me, right? So we get into this thing about the women I respect are really about me and what they do for me, right? And when the men we respect is about what they do for the world and for everybody else. So that in itself is telling around to the point of we got to move beyond the self-interest for who they are in connection to me, to the young girl in West Harlem needs to be as valuable. We have to feel about the same way about her as we do the girl in West Africa, right? When we stop, making this thing about I'm only going to protect mine, that conditionality again, someone who's connected to me, and think about women and girls broadly the same way, that's when we move the needle.
Yeah.
So as we get ready to jump in and keep moving along, I want to make sure that I want to those who are on the YouTube channel, please throw your questions in the chat. We want to hear from you. I know that Elaine, I think we have one or two. So if you can get them together, Elaine will bring you in to throw some questions at the panel that are in the chat. But go ahead, who's up next? Who's going to say something?
I was gonna say that Q, you definitely added this extra layer to this thing that was kind of brewing in my brain. When you talk about the roles of women in our lives and how we feel about those particular women in our lives and our responsibility to those women versus other women that are not directly connected to us, and how that sense of responsibility comes directly from that role that they play in our lives. I think that's deep, and that's something that I'm gonna chew on for a little bit. At the same time, when you brought up Micaiah, the thing that and you started speaking about like all these reasons that people, particularly Black men, were saying that the police were within their right to kill one of our children, one of our youth. It came down to all these things that moved her further from the goalpost of what it means to be feminine, right? When we talk, right, it was she's in a bigger body, right? Her skin tone, right? The fact that she was being aggressive in that space, right? All these things move her further away from that goalpost of femininity. And when I think about the women that we feel like we're supposed to protect, right? Our mother, our sister, right? Our aunts, whoever it is, right? We kind of hold them in this pristine sense of femininity, right? Like this pristine, innocent, right? Like even to think about like how we feel about men who have relationships with our mother, right? Like ain't nobody supposed to have sex with my mother, right? The same thing with our sisters, right? Like you can't like no boys, stay away from them boys. I'm coming out fighting if a boy even talking about you, right? And it's like, but even when we want to protect them in that sense about like the I guess their sexual value, which that's a weird sentence, but it goes back to these are pristine, feminine people, and I want to keep them in that box of pristine femininity. And again, as people get further away from pristine femininity in my mind, right? And that's why we talk about like the type of violence that happens against Black trans women and the fact that people don't stand up for them, particularly Black men don't show up for them the way they should, because there's this thing in their head that like, this woman is so far away from femininity that it's not my job to protect her anymore.
Well, Dave, I think we have some questions. David, you want to bring in one of the questions from the group?
Yeah, sure. Can everybody hear me?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Edwards Mentoring says, does anyone here have recent current stats for sexual assault in New York City during the pandemic compared to the increase in intimate partner violence during this time?
I don't have stats, but I know there's been an increase in domestic violence, IPV, sexual violence, and even child abuse, just because of those kind of the stresses of being mandated to be at home, and exacerbating violence with those, though, you're kind of quarantined with those that have been doing harm to you, pre-COVID. And the numbers are kind of tricky because one, I say it's too early to really figure that out. And secondly, that because your abusive partner is in your home with you, you're less likely to call because you will be identified as disclosing and may be in a threat of violence because of that. So I think it's a really tricky time, but I think we have to go with the idea of, all of those gender-based violence, we talked that umbrella piece, all the things that can fit under that have probably and most likely have increased. And we just don't know the numbers because the numbers, the calls don't necessarily tell the whole story. But the city may have some numbers. I don't know if
Ted, you want to jump in there?
Ed Hill has kind of done that research somewhere.
The statistic that is around domestic violence, I don't know if it's New York City, but nationally is 30% increase since COVID. And that's not unlike what's happening internationally as well, for all the reasons that Q talked about.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add.
Go ahead, Alvaro.
I don't have a number to add, but I wanted to add that I don't know because I don't know off the top of my head, but we did get similar reports that it was on increase. And I wanted to add something he was saying about the underreporting. We've always known domestic violence is underreported, but I wanted to even add another layer of that since we're talking a bit about sexual violence, right? And this is the month of that. Is that even within and I found this to be true on this was sort of taught to me, passed on to me to understand, and then I confirmed that as a case manager, hearing hundreds of reports, face to face with survivors, where if the choice between answering yes, there's domestic violence in my relationship, or there's physical violence, even if the choice is between answering that to engage with the services you want or whatever it is, or to say that my partner has sexually assaulted me, the choice is always going to be, yeah, my partner hit me, right? People don't want to talk about the sexual violence part. There's so much stigma still around that, right? For anyone, right, of any gender, right? So the part of the work is also destigmatizing that, so folks can actually feel the safety necessary to be able to tell the full story to whoever their advocate is, whoever their counselor, whatever it is. But so I just wanted to add that piece, that we know that sexual violence incidence numbers are even lower because people don't say that part. They'll say I've been abused in other ways, but I don't want to talk about that part. So
wow, I just want to get a quick shout out. We got some folks from Georgia and we got some folks from Ohio on the line also. So I'm excited that we're branching outside of New York, because this is a very it's a issue that happens not only in New York but happens all over the country, and it's a conversation we as men need not only happen here, we need to have it in Georgia, we need to have it in Ohio. And I'm glad that at least we have opportunity to speak about it. And whoever's out in Ohio, I'm a Buckeye. All right, now just but let's keep going, because I do want to. I think we have another question in the chat. I think somebody put something about the women's box. Is something called a women's box? I never heard of it. Ted, you ever hear something called a women's box?
So Q might speak to it. When we talk to kids, though, if we're going in and talking to a high school and this is brought up, it's actually not the woman's box that girls are taught. Boys are taught the man box. What girls are taught is the ladies box, right? They're taught to be a lady, because a lady doesn't raise her voice. A lady crosses her legs. A lady listens to the man. A woman box is a much more empowering thing, right? So I haven't. So yes. I mean, when we define womanhood, or when women define womanhood, it looks much different than the man box. But what that brings up for me is really how we pass this down from one generation to the next. And when we pass down messages to girls, it's not about being a woman. It's about being a lady. It's not as empowering as being a woman. So Q, I don't know if that's been your experience, you have something you want to add to that.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. Because just even like I used to do these, when I first started doing this work, the male box and then the female box, and just talking about a female box had sexual connotation to it, right? So we had to move away from that. But a lot of it is, like Ted is talking about, with the male box, we're talking about masculinity or certain types of levels of different types of masculinities that keeps you in the box. And then women and girls have to navigate a box as well. and it's multiple boxes. You know what I mean? There's a Black male box. You know, we have to navigate, you know, Black masculinity as compared to the examples that we have around white masculinity, and therefore with around religion, around sexual orientation, you know, all these different, there's boxes for everything, right? And you can lay them on top of each other. You can intersect them, you know, just kind of like the places where it overlaps. And that person might be the most, or whoever's outside of that is like the most susceptible to harm being done to them, you know? And what's important about that, I think, too, is like what brings us back into the quote unquote comfort of that box, right? And usually that could be sexual violence towards a girl or towards a guy, or, you know, some form of abuse towards somebody else that gives us back into this kind of comfortable place, which is really a contradiction in itself, you know what I mean? So I just wanted to, you know, add on to that.
Jerry?
No, I love what I'm hearing right now. I actually want to take that and actually provide a provocative question, right? And so it's a two-part, right? I put this to the panelists. The first part is, as men, right? How can we be better advocates and really bring up feminism, right? And I use the term feminism to empower women, right? And at what point, or is there a point where feminism really undercuts and cuts down on manhood, right? Because I've had arguments on one side where women would be like, hey, I'm being a feminist. It would be at the detriment of a man just to like break that man down, and man like, hey, I don't even understand what's happening. While the other side is like, I wish I could have more support as a woman and empower me. So I asked this to the panelists, all right, cool. How do we as men uplift feminism? And then at what point does feminism now undercut or undermine its own purpose, which is to empower women, but be beneficial for all?
I'll just, how I want to react to that, Jerry, is to say that, first of all, feminism is just about respecting women and valuing women. That's it. You know, it's not this bad word. It's kind of like saying, for us, for as men, for us to have issues with feminism is the same as white people have an issue with Black Lives Matter. Same thing.
Nice.
What are they talking about? They're treated just fine. Like, what are they complaining about? Right? They gaining too much ground as it is. Right? It's, so you know, but feminism has been really taken and really turned into this bad word where it's not that at all. It's only about respect and valuing women. That's all it is. It's the opposite of misogyny, but we're so accustomed to being misogynistic that we don't even hear ourselves. Right? In the same way that white folks are so accustomed to being racist, they don't even hear themselves. It's the same thing. So that's kind of my response to feminism, that it's about our shared humanity. Women and men are equal, right? And when we start weighing things out, we might even say that, wow, women are, you know, they're actually closer to their humanity than we are, because they're able to talk about what they're feeling. They're able to share their emotions and be vulnerable. They're able to ask for help. They're able to connect with each other and have empathy in a way. There's 6 of us here. If we were partnered with 6 women, right? Well, let's just take 6 men and 6 women, not us, because we would have conversation. You get these 6 women who are strangers together for 5 hours on a Saturday, take their male identified partners, put them in another room 5 hours together. They come back together. These women know everything about, they've cried, they've laughed, they know everything about each other. We just talk about, well, I know what he does and what sports team he likes. You know what I mean? That's it. Right. So there's so much that we miss as men, that we're disconnected from our humanity. These rigid notions of manhood are killing men. That's why I have flowers in the back, for y'all to see, like, yes, I like flowers. That's right. That's my authentic self. And because listen, the first 10 years of my marriage, I would bring flowers home about every week, every 2 weeks. And, you know, my wife would enjoy it, but if I didn't bring flowers home, she wasn't saying cute. She wasn't saying, where are the flowers? You know, if her girlfriends are around, they say, oh, 10 years later, he's still bringing you flowers. Oh, wow, you're so lucky. She was like, yeah, you know, it's cool. He always brings me flowers, right? So it occurred to me, when I don't bring them home, she's not saying, where are my flowers this week? You don't love me this week, anything like that. It occurred to me that when the flowers aren't in the house, I miss flowers. But I had to go under the disguise of bringing it home for my wife because men aren't supposed to like flowers. So now when I go to the florist, knowing my authentic self, I choose the flowers very carefully. I don't let them put them in a vase. I take them home to arrange them. You know why, y'all? Because I like flowers. So my point is that we're missing out on so much with this man box that we're forced to live in. Well, that we are expected to live in. We're not forced to, as you all are demonstrating.
Right.
Oh, go ahead, Q.
Al, you going?
No, you can go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, bro.
Oh, I was just gonna say
I was just
we trying to be nice. Who go first? You go first. You go first.
Al, man, you older than I am, man. Go, bro.
I just wanted to say to Mr. Bunch's point, that thing about flowers, as I heard you say, it's like I kind of like blasting Mary J. Blige. Like I kind of like playing Mary J. Blige's flowers. I can play it because that's what I want to hear. You know what I mean? And it's not it's not because like, oh, I'm playing it because women. I really like Mary J. Blige, so I get that point about like, is it like being like, all right, it's people around. I know I can't play Mary J. Blige. Everybody want to play that, hear it, but it's like, wait, I want to hear it. What about what I like as a man that may be different from what I've been told I could like? And I do want to echo that point that you made about feminism is just about equality and equity between men and women, and this rigid notion of manhood basically says that feminism takes away from my manhood because your manhood is based in oppressing women. So if something comes up that says don't oppress women, then it's taken away from your sense of being able to oppress, right? The only thing that I always want to be mindful of when I talk about feminism is that I know that there is a history of particularly white feminism being built on the backs of Black women, and then when everything comes aside, they push it to the side. I'm like, all right, y'all figure out the rest for yourselves. So I just want to make sure that whenever we're talking about feminism, we are talking about intersectional feminism. We're talking about womanism, right? Feminism that includes women across all spectrums of race, color, ethnicity, and trans women as well. So I just wanted to make sure I added that to the conversation.
Facts.
I think those are. I wanted to set those points as well around womanism and what that means historically. So it's always important that, I think, and just in this conversation around, like we've been talking about race essentially, that we can't exclude sexism from racism and what role that plays in all of these words. So bringing up the F word, I remember I was selected to be part of a panel to talk about the F word, and I had no idea that they were talking about the F word as in feminism. I was like, wow, y'all seen it as that, like that negative. And like to Ted's point, man, you could just move some of those words around, letters around, and you spell out humanism. It's close to, in terms of, like, even when we think about, we're talking about patriarchy here, right? All this functions under patriarchy. And when we think about, historically, in places where there was matriarchal societies were about treating people equally, just like with like civil rights, we learned later that was about human rights. And just around like, feminism, from reading, different scholars, part of it is about the role towards equality, equal pay, equal treatment and fair treatment. But ultimately it's about mutuality, right? Mutuality is kind of like that system. And, feminists are not, they don't hate men, all these myths about how feminists hate men. They struggle with how we treat them, right? And how we, and that's all real. And I think that's what we need to kind of feel and say, but just kind of like that word feminine, and we're talking about masculine, we all could, we can all prescribe to that. Masculinity is not just about manhood in men, you know what I mean? I think about masculinities as a scale, right? On one end is femininity, and on the opposite end is maybe toxic masculinity, right? And we think about who we are when we are the safest, and when we feel closer to our true selves is more towards the feminine, right? We all kind of lay in what I call like middle masculinity, and we have to kind of reframe some of these conversations even about masculinity. Toxic masculinity does harm, but sometimes, you know, young brothers and men that I work with, they're toxic to meet toxic masculinity coming towards them. So it might be a defense mechanism, but no matter what, it's a point of entry to have a conversation about why are you thinking this way and what is your masculinity at the cost of somebody else, right? So on a day-to-day basis, if we think about all of us on this panel, when we are our safest, where are you on that scale? Are you in the middle? Or are you towards more the feminine side? And men have a feminine side, women have a masculine side. All of it could be healthy and very unhealthy as well. But when you think about where are you on that scale? And I'll ask you brothers, like where are you on the scale right now in this conversation? Like where are you? Are you towards the toxic, towards the feminine, or are you in the middle somewhere? I would say I'm in the middle.
I'm in the middle. I just as a quick anecdote, I remember maybe 6-7 years ago, I had interviewed for a job with sanitation, and one of the questions at the time, it was a lady who had asked me the question. She felt the need to say, "Hey, how do you feel working underneath or being supervised by a woman?" And I thought that was kind of like, I feel absolutely fine. Like I've been around women, I was raised by women, whatever. But the fact that, mind you, this still in this 2000s we talking about, and it was a need to ask that question that I was gonna feel any type of way. So I 100% agree with you. I'm dead in the middle. Alvaro, I know you was gonna say something.
Yeah, I'm going to answer the question, but I also want to backtrack really quickly about the F, right? The F word, the feminism, and Altabar, I'm glad you made that distinction between where there's white feminism and there's been different waves, and how, a particular wave was very much focused on the carceral system, and right, so all that. And so I wanted to put into, and for everybody listening, and because feminism, like anything, any other ism or anything, any other philosophy or anything else, you're going to get different brands of it because people are going to take it and run with it, right? But at the core of it, I think, is what Ted mentioned. It's equality, it's equity, right? But what I wanted to say was that I've had the incredible good fortune, to not only learn some of the deepest lessons that I know about gender-based violence, and feminism and sexism and intersectionality from Black colleagues, right? And colleagues of color who are women, right? And so if anybody wants to, because just today I saw a headline that said, manhood is under attack, right? And it's like, man should be worried because this is trying to strike at the core of what being a man is. And then I thought to myself, reading humble amounts of Angela Davis and bell hooks, and that when I saw that headline, I'm like, you clearly haven't read a single page of any of these women, because it's all about love. I mean, bell hooks has all about love, right? But it's literally all about love. It's centered around love, and so to turn that and to weaponize it into some kind of attack that women are launching on men is just, it's the most absurd and ignorant thing, because you clearly haven't read any of these feminist works that are really trying to bring everybody in. And then in terms of the spectrum, I for a long time has seen myself towards the feminine end of the spectrum, and again, it's something that has, we can go into a whole discussion about sexual orientation, gender, right? And like how they're not the same, they kind of interplay with each other, right? And so for a long time, I know I've leaned that way, sort of the way I present and the better parts, I would say, of my personality and who I am tend to be described as feminine traits, right? Fast forward now, working in this industry where I'm one of maybe one or two men usually in any space, I've been able to embrace that in a safe way, right? And I feel so fortunate that I've been able to do that, right? And what I see now, fast forward to being a social worker, those feminine traits are what's made me good at this work, which is the parts of me that center love and gentleness and vulnerability, right? And empathy, right? So yeah, I'm sticking with that, right?
And that's a great point. And not to take up more time, and I know other brothers could chime in on that if they want, but like during the course of a day, right? When, depending on if I'm home and it's a safe home, I'm more towards my feminine self. If I'm walking to school, not forget me for a second. Young person I work with, struggling with domestic violence at home, domestic and child sexual abuse at home, right? So at home, he has this hyper masculine mask on, right? He's defending his young sisters who are being harmed by the father in this case, who's doing the sexual abuse, right? So he's always on guard, protecting his young sister. And then sometimes he doesn't want to leave home because he feels that she'll be harmed if he's not there. So on his way, lives in a pretty rough neighborhood. So, he puts another mask on when he's walking outside his door, walking to school. Gangs are recruiting him. He joined another gang to protect him from the gang that was trying to recruit him, right? So he goes to school. The police officers are the security guards at school. He puts on another mask to kind of figure out, am I going to be confrontational with these police, or am I going to put a different mask on to be more strategic so I can get into my classroom and take the test I need to take, right? And then same thing, he puts on several masks during the course of the day. So masculinity is fluid, femininity is fluid, and femininity is only the thing that makes us closer to our truer selves, right? That's all that is. So we have to think about where we land on that scale and how we're perceived on that scale. And at the middle of that is where we have sexual violence and bullying and all these other forms of community violence that could take place. So I just think about that young woman in this case, that same trajectory from going home to school and what she has to put up with in terms of, when we talk about denim day, wearing jeans or not wearing jeans, clothing doesn't matter in terms of the harm that she can receive. But just think about the path of this young woman who's trying to get from whatever's happening at home to the community, to school or the workplace, has to deal with all this potential violence based on how we view her and how we view ourselves.
So there was a question, and I'm a little nervous about even asking it, but I'm going to try to take a stab at it. It talked about the word femininity. And basically they would say it's rooted as a European word because it doesn't fit true to all women. I'll use it as that way. I'll try to clean it up some. So how do you see that? Is that term just for one set of women and not all women, or is it just, or it is, or how is it, what about so all women really fall into that category or don't fall into the category? So does that make sense to everybody? Or because they're saying it's a European term and it's not really for everybody.
I get the question. I struggle with it because, I feel like I would want women to answer questions about women. You know what I mean? Like, I don't feel equipped to do that. But I also feel like whether it's the spectrum that we talked about, where we fit in, or whether it's femininity, that it's still around definitions and defining something. And I think as men, and what I hope to do, this is what I do personally and with my children, and in the work that we do, we promote it, is to redefine manhood, but not even to redefine it, but to reimagine of what it is for you. What is manhood for you? What does it look like, masculinity look like for you? Because I can't judge whether that is it or not. This is what it looks like for me. You're gonna see flowers in my frame. That's what you're gonna see. You know what I mean? So I really think that that's kind of where we need to get. I would like to see us move away from, as a society, these definitions. And but it seems like whatever. If you're for women, or if you're doing something that has been seen as something that women do, then it's against men, or it's not masculine, and that's just not true. Women are protectors and providers, men are protectors and providers. Men can be nurturers and vulnerable, women can be nurturers and vulnerable. That's humanity. The things that restrict us are how we define these things. And yes, in other countries, they may define it differently, but wherever there's patriarchy, you will see this. You'll see women and girls as having less value. You'll see women as the property of men. You'll see women and girls as sexual objects. You'll see men as being stoic and wanting to be in control and dominate and all of those things. And these behaviors, they're not embedded in our DNA, they're embedded in our socialization.
I think it's dope that you took it there. And Alvaro also spoke about like these wonderful women that are around him currently at NGBV and were around me at NGBV, right? And LeVay, Lay, Destiny, Maria, and Sarah, right? All these women that were around me as I was realizing how deep my privilege ran. I was actually having a conversation with one of them the other day, and to your point about, right, like, and it's important that we define things, because defining things helps us like unpack things and work towards like I guess making a safer space for people. At the same time, I was having this conversation with one of the women that I would say is super influential in my growth as a man from NGBV, and we were talking about masculine and feminine energy. And the thing I had said was like, I don't think that's a thing. Like like we kind of say that all the time, but like energy is energy, right? Like masculine and feminine are socialized, right? Like if you think about a lion, a woman lion goes out and gets the food for all the family. I don't think that the men lion is like, man, that's a masculine woman lion right there, right? Because they haven't been socialized around masculinity and femininity, right? I think that there's good energy, there's positive energy, and then there's bad energy, right? Energy that does harm, energy that destroys, and it's energy that builds, right? And I think that the energy that we usually think about as energy that is positive and beautiful and building and uplifting and nurturing and all these wonderful things, we connect to femininity, but that's because that's how we've been socialized around it, right? Like we also, right? Because not to say that there aren't some wonderful things that are protection and safety and all these things that we tie to masculinity that are in positive energy, right? But I don't know. I'm not an energyist. I don't know if that's the word for people who study energy, right? But what I can say is that, again, to your point, a lot of the stuff when we talk about what is feminine and what is masculine comes back to what we've been socialized around, what belongs to women, particularly around emotions, and what belongs to men, particularly around emotions and protection and tasks and all of these things. And I think using the language and the words to help unpack that is important, but I think that make sure we're using the language to actually unpack that is the important part. Because if we're just using the language to further amplify the language, I don't think we're doing the right thing with it.
Yeah, I agree. I won't add anything to what was said already. I mean, repeat anything that was said already. I just think about like, the terminology. I would never answer that question for somebody else. You know what I mean? It's really about them telling their own stories in relationship to that. I think about my great-grandmother, my grandmother, and even my mom. My mom a little bit closer to what that towards the womanist, ideology and practice. But like, my great-grandmother, she was like probably the staunchest feminist, right? But never used that word or that terminology. She just lived it, and lived it in practice. I observed it in wonderment, you know what I mean? And same with my grandmother and my aunts, they just kind of live this type of way and lifestyle. So I would never kind of even, limit, how they live to a particular type of word or define that for any woman. But I would just say this too, that, I don't think, masculinity, we always kind of frame it as a thing that men do and femininity as a thing that women do. There's so much in between that, and we could all kind of take on some of that, that practice or some of those actions. But yeah, femininity and feminism is staunch in a lot of political stuff around, people's experiences. And I would never want to answer that for them. I think each person would have to do that, but we have to kind of lay race on top of these things that, to the question of, how does that show up? And even I work with men, it's all connected to systemic response. How does the system respond to, Black men of color, working class men? Is that system a way of kind of really getting people that need the help they need to work around sexual assault and sexual violence issues or intimate partner violence issues. And likewise, so like what is being done, what type of work are we doing to kind of really move men from one place and one thinking to another thinking, and therefore changing their behavior.
You're on mute, Scott, you're on mute.
So as we get ready to turn the corner, we start trying to bring this home. I want to talk a little bit about, so as men, when we see this behavior out in society and we know it's wrong, how do we help, or how do we show up with women? Because I can see in certain situations, or at least guys I've talked to say, well, I've tried to help women. They were like, oh, I don't need you. I had to do it myself, and then, or you try to step in and help out, and then, you become the victim of all the backlash. And then there's women who tell me all the time, I just wish a brother would have stepped up. I didn't appreciate how I was treated. And I'm looking at brothers and they got their hands in their pocket, trying to act like I don't exist. So on one hand, you want to help out. And one hand, you don't know when to help out. Has that happened to anybody here, or how do we deal with that when that perks up?
Yeah, I'll go real quick. Like in a prep for these conversations, I talked about a story of when I first started doing this work. I would jump right in the middle of somebody's conflict. You know what I mean? I would put my arm around the person and, what's going on, brother, and almost get beat down because of that. And but the reality of it was, like, in terms of like when you intervene, you got to think about, it's not a one size fits all. It's not like a one single approach to everyone. You got to kind of figure out what the situation is. Who do you approach and why? A lot of times we go directly to the women and say, are you okay? Is everything all right? And we kind of step in and protect them from whatever their situation may be. And that could be the biggest mistake in the world, because I think, just like you mentioned, I think, Jerry, you talked about this before. It's like, you jump in and then the person jumps. And then in the case where it's a woman, they jump on you for getting involved. But we got to think about, why is she doing that? And what happens when we leave, right? So they're not going to be there for the whole train ride or wherever the place may be. And so we have to think about, what is she left with if we come in and step in on her? And I remember doing that one time, and the guy was like, oh, this is your new man? This is your boyfriend, et cetera, et cetera. And I stepped, and, I stayed around to see what was going to happen, but I just made the situation worse. The first thing you want to do is do no harm, whatever that means, and however way you can do that, but then figure out what is the best way. It could be like from far away. Are you two okay? Is everything all right over there? Or you can approach if it's a man that's doing the abuse, approach him. Like, hey, brother, are you okay, man? You don't got to deal with that by yourself. Just to figure out strategies of doing that, showing your own concern, how it impacts you. Don't speak up for her on what you're seeing and how it's impacting her, because that can make it worse for her later on. And even with police involved, police don't stay around. They may make the wrong decision, and we can make it worse. So we just got to be strategic about it. Like, who is the person? Do we know the person? What language we use, and how do we get involved? Right? Pick and choosing what's the best route, strategizing.
Anybody else? And I would also even talk about, and I would say this. So what happens when we see men picking on LGBTQ or trans men, and we see them picking up? How do we still step in and be able to say, hey, that's not right? How can we do it safely? Because I really understand that, because you're right. When as a good doer, when we walk away, we don't know what that person has to deal with later down the line with their partner, who we may have insulted, hurt their feelings, punked them down or something, and we made it worse. But so what do we do? I know I want to be a good person. I don't want to see it. I don't want to walk away from it. And maybe we need to, and I would even ask some of the women who are still on, maybe you can throw something in the chat to help us out, to be able to say, hey, listen, here's something that would makes sense. I know that I was watching something and they were saying, they said there's a hand sign that you should teach your children that they should be able to do that. If they feel they're being accosted or something, they should give you this hand sign. And if you know the hand sign, you know that that child is in trouble. You need to intervene in what's happening with that child. Did anybody ever hear about that? There's a certain hand signal that they're teaching children that they should use if they're ever being abducted or something like that.
I haven't heard of that, Scott, but I did want to plug Hollaback, hollaback.org. They have great trainings on bystander intervention, and they're exactly about this. So I think folks, if you have a chance, check it out. Hollaback does some really great work, and some of the things, some of the ones I remember is like, like distract, like that's one I have used before. And in that particular instance, it worked, where you ask the person or you direct the question in the direction of the people who are having the conflict or the person who's being harassed or whatnot. And you ask the question of like, trying to get somewhere, what the stop is or what time it is, or some general trivial question. And you kind of play dumb a little bit, and it serves to diffuse a little bit what's going on. And so the thinking behind that is that in that diffusion of like stopping, both bodies have time for the emotions to sort of like settle down a little bit, and you after that question, even if the answer to that question is, I don't know, stop bothering me or whatever, like, F off, whatever it is. But in that moment, like, it's a disruption. So anyway, there's a few other ones there. They call them the five Ds. So I would tell people to check that out, but I don't think there's an easy answer to this. I think, as Q was saying, you got to read the room, right? You got to read the situation. If it's in a crowded subway, right, you might be able to make eye contact with somebody else and be like, I'm going to say something, right? And like, see if they got your back as well, and then maybe they will too. Like, but if you're alone, there's, so it really depends, right? And then I think I want to echo what you said in terms of like, who are you addressing? Think about that and why you are going towards that person, right? And how are you doing it, right? Is it in a way that is going to escalate things, right? Isn't it a calm, concerned way? Isn't like, is everybody okay here type of thing, And I want to say transparently, like, there is risk in all of this, right? And I would say, think about if something like this has ever happened to you, would you want people around you, fellow, humans around you, to take that little bit of a risk for you, right? So it kind of comes to that, but obviously, like, you have to keep yourself safe and all that. So I think it's about reading the room and making sure that you're not adding fuel to the fire, right? That you're really actually asking around from a place of concern, not from a place of like, I'm gonna mess this guy up because he shouldn't talk to women that way. Right? That's a different thing. And listen, some people might opt to do that. That wouldn't be my way to do it, but you know what I mean? So really question, like, where's that coming from? But it really depends on the situation.
Can I just add, you all covered everything. I just want to add that there is risk in everything. There was risk for Rosa Parks to stay in her seat too. I mean, this is the way change happens. I mean, really, this is the way change happens, So I do think what we can do as men in particular who are listening in the audience is start with ourselves, right? Start with ourselves, our own behaviors, our attitudes, our beliefs, what our thoughts are about gender, what our thoughts are about women, misogyny, really understanding who we are and looking at our own language and our own behaviors, and then taking that in our circle of other men. Where you hear another man talking some crap, you can say, hey, bro, come on, man. We're not going to do that, are we? We don't do that anymore. Haven't you been watching TV? Haven't you been seeing things like, we don't do that anymore. Good men don't do that anymore. Like, I don't want to say good or bad. And I don't really like toxic or non-toxic, because who gets to determine that, really, right? But we're being the best version of ourselves we can be. And men don't do that anymore, right? Because that's what we're hoping white folks are saying to each other after all we went through in this last year, right? Oh, hold up. No. Racism exists. Systemic racism exists. We're all benefiting from it. Well, men, it's the same thing here. Q talked about earlier, the male privilege and entitlement that we have, it doesn't go with me as with the race privilege, like it goes with the white man, but I got privilege. I got male privilege waiting for me. When I open the door, it's there, right? So it's starting with us, with ourselves, and using our influence and platform to make change. So that means brothers who are at the mosque or the synagogue or the church, you can use your platform to talk about this thing. There's sexism all over, everywhere that we are. There's more sexism than there's not. So we can point these things out, but we have to be aware of it ourselves. When we talk to our boys, when we talk to our daughters, what messages are we giving? When we're looking at TV and we're listening to the radio and our kids in the room, use those as teachable moments to what that lyric was or what that is or what this is, you know? So we can still make changes within ourselves. And you know what, if we're doing that, then when something happens on the subway or wherever else, we're starting to see a culture shift where we're not going to be the outlier around this issue. Others are going to say, oh no, other men are going to say, oh, we don't do that. In the same way that we're hoping that other white folks say, oh no, that's not going to happen because now I know better. Well, we need to put that responsibility on ourselves around gender and around women and the LGBTQ, transgender, non-conforming community.
I love just to add to what Ted said, I love where he came from, where a lot of the stuff that we were talking about, where Scott posed the question, we talking at point of crisis, right? But really, we want to get at prevention, right? With the microaggressions, whether it's a family member or friend said something that was condescending at the dinner table, and you know, relationship dictates your role and your range, right? So the closer you are in a relationship, the easier it is for you to be like, hey, cousin, I don't know if that was cool. Same thing what Ted was talking about, but catching it when it's micro makes it a whole lot easier than dealing with a very catalytic, you know what I'm saying, area where it's you in a train station and now it's a stranger. And of course, you got to assess the risk for your own harm and helping what that looks like, and then calling the appropriate help and intervention. But catching it early and what I've been hearing is a constant refrain, breaking this systemic social construct that says we have to act like this, move like this, talk like this, and just breaking that totally down. Because I think, again, what Ted said, we're talking about humanity and respect. Like at the end of the day, bring it all down. How do we get to a place of humanity for all and respect for all, you know, and just really driving that. So I just wanted to put that on the table for us, man.
And to add to that as well, I think that when we talk about privilege, right, one thing that privilege allows you to do is to not listen, right? To not listen to other people, right? So we having all these conversations about how to step up, right? And what it looks like to step up, right? But also in this conversation, like, what does it like to step down? Like, what does it look like to be like, all right, a woman said something, a trans person said something, somebody from the LGBTQ community said something. If they need me to echo it, I will. But I don't have to add my 2 cents right here because this is the experience of that person, right? To the point that Mr. Bunch made earlier about, you know what I mean? Like, we're now in a space where we expect white people to be saying racism is real, the same way that we're expected to be saying that sexism is real. The reason that we expect white people to be saying that is because we expect at this point, they're listening to us, right? They're echoing what we're saying, right? And I think that to the same point when it comes to men speaking up about sexism and how we advocate, it comes from the fact that we've listened to women say that this is real and we echo that is real and we advocate for them in the way that they ask to be advocated for, as opposed to I am the hero, I am the protector, I know also I can do what needs to be done here. But it's like, if you don't know what to do, how can you do what needs to be done? So I think it also comes to listening and knowing when to knowing that advocating for somebody comes directly from knowing not knowing what they need, but listening to their experience around what they need.
So guys, it sounds like, and I just want to make sure I'm clear with this. It sounds like most guys know what to do, want to do it, but not sure when to do it. Would you say that that's pretty accurate, or there's just guys just not getting it? They just not trying doing things. Because I believe I do have a lot of guys who, at least I hang around, they know the right thing to do. They just don't.
I'll tell you this real quick, kind of related to that question. Going back many years when I developed the men's work at Connect, we did like guerrilla research. We asked people, attitudes about domestic violence, intimate partner violence, sexual violence, all these things. And I did these interviews. I interviewed men individually. And what I got from an individual man was very different from what I got from a man in a focus group or collective of men. So and I always kind of think about this, the individual man versus an individual man within a group, two different things, right? Individually, these guys were saying, yeah, men need to do more work, to kind of interrupt violence and prevent violence, right? Connect's work is ultimately prevention work. So, they were saying, yeah, it's terrible what we do when we let this happen and et cetera, et cetera. But then when I got him in a group, that same guy was worried about, like just on the screen, Ted is right next to me, right? I'm saying individually, this is terrible, men need to step up. But when I got into a group, I was worried about what Ted was going to think about me for standing up for a woman, right? Or for somebody who's being harmed. So I curbed that. And it was about 12 guys in this group. Each of them individually said, men need to do more, we can do more, right? We need to ally with women, et cetera, et cetera. But together, not one of them said the same thing because they were worried about what the other men would think because they wanted to step up for someone else. So, I just say that to say that, to your point, Scott, we potentially have it in us. Masculinity is is a really interesting thing that because of our masculinity, we cannot be our true selves, right? We're worried about what the group thinks, what the fraternity thinks, with the gang, whatever group you're part of. We're worried about them so much that we can't even live out our true ideals about how we see humanity. So I think that's one of the things that I do. And it's not really self-plug, but some of you guys have been to my men's roundtable. That is the space where we are trying to have these conversations that we have as individuals collectively and really strategize around how we can step up for and stand with, just like as they stand for us and stand with us for women and even ourselves. Like, what does accountability look like with compassion? And then what does safety look like in terms of, we talking about sexual assault month. And, so what does safety look like? And how do we contribute to that? And how do we contribute to the harm? And kind of like, really figuring out what is it that we can do? How do we perform? How do we behave? And think about all the different situations that could come up around how can we step in safely. And if we don't step in right away, there's something we could do at home, on our block, in our building, in our school, wherever it may be. So I just want to kind of talk about like individual men versus men in groups and what changes our attitudes and when we're in collectives.
Can I add to that, please? That's a great point, because those men individually, as you say, are thinking one way. We get them in a group of men, it changes because, again, if we're doing something for women or supposed to be in support of women and we're with other men, then we're seen as somehow doing something against men.
Right.
So, and I want to just tie this in. When you started talking, Q, it made me think about the high school boys that we work with. And so we have this, something called Live Respect, Coaching Healthy, Respectful Manhood. It's a curriculum we wrote with Scholastic. It's free online at calltomen.org. Anybody can take it. But we did a pilot project, and I just want to touch into what Q talked about. In the pilot, we asked boys from all around the country, affluent private schools, financially challenged public schools, indigenous communities, Mexican-American schools in Texas, all over. And we asked boys in high school, can you define consent? Only 19% of boys could define consent. 8 out of 10 boys could not, which explains a lot. It explains sexual assault in the military. It explains sexual assault on college campuses. It explains why girls and women between 16 and 24 are at the highest risk for being sexually assaulted. Our boys think no means try harder. But I bring this up because as a parent, if we have individual conversations, because a lot of parents think that their kid's not going to do that. He's not going to rape anyone. He knows what consent is. But they have the individual conversation, and the kid on a one-on-one can answer the question in the ways that it needs to be answered, right? But then they get into it with a group of their boys, and they're sexually objectifying a girl, whether it's sexually harassing her on the street, hollering at her on the street, right? Alvaro with Holla Back, the work they do, or whether it's in the stairwell of the school building. Like, that's what girls have informed us, that they feel like, you know how when women say they feel attacked when they go through a construction site? Well, the stairways of a high school is the same kind of thing, where the boys are hanging out. Here comes your daughter, your little sister, and they giving it to her. Boom, 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 boom. Saying all the things that we taught them how to say now, because they didn't make it up on their own. Our generation, us, the men of their community that look just like us, who aren't going to go and sexually assault somebody, but they're going to say, damn, look at, right? So this is what we're passing down to our boys. So when those boys are in a group, they're not able to assert themselves when they see the homeboy doing something bad, or saying something to that girl, or taking a girl over down the boiler room of the building or wherever. They're afraid to assert themselves. So now this girl is harmed, and these boys are all a part of it. Because we haven't had conversations well, what are you going to do in that situation, son? So it speaks to your point. I appreciate that.
Okay, guys.
Oh,
I know we.
all right, guys.
Okay, I know we have another. We can do another half hour of this, but Al, I'm gonna let you get yours in. But go ahead.
Yeah, Al, that's that veteran move, man. I said, boom.
I see you.
Now put your foot in it.
It's just, I had a much bigger thought, but I guess this is one sentence I want to put in the space about accountability, right? Especially as we speak about masculinity, right? Especially to the point that y'all said about men alone say these things that we attribute to protection and safety, but men get together and they're scared to offend each other, right? And the one quick sentence I'll say is that if we teach that masculinity is leadership, but when men get together, they stop being leaders and they kowtow to make sure they don't offend each other, then are we actually teaching men leadership? And I'll just leave that sentence there because I had a whole bunch of places I wanted to go, but I know time.
It's a contradiction, Al. It's a contradiction.
So guys, unfortunately, I know that we could do another half hour of this, or maybe another hour, because it seems like we're just on the breaking point where we can really make a difference, and we have to get ready to close out. So, and I hate this, and I don't know if some of it we have to figure out how to do the barbershop so we can jump in the fire quicker, faster, deeper, and then we can get some resolution to this before the 2 hours are winding up. So to kind of close out, and I love this conversation. And once again, I hope those who are on heard some really powerful tips and keys that were gems that were hearing from men who are really trying to make a difference in our community, in our city here in New York. And hopefully as people listen abroad, we're trying to make a difference that we can maybe even help out and change the narrative around the conversation we're happening. So, Al, I'm going to let you, since you're the one of wisdom right now, and I love what you're saying, and I hope that we get some more guys like you, and I hope you come back to the barbershop. But give me something that you want to make sure that the people, before they sign off tonight, that they know that, listen, this is what this work is about, and this is what you need to hear. And I want everybody to kind of answer that question. I want you to give them something to say, you know what? I heard Al, I heard Ted, I heard Q, I heard Alvaro, I heard Jerry. They gave me a jewel that I can put in my pocket, and I can walk around New York City, and I can take this jewel out anytime I need to, because I want to be a difference maker in New York City. So Al, that's for you.
First and foremost, I want to say that any wisdom that's coming out of me that's being expounded from me is because I'm surrounded by you all and putting me in a space to be amplified, and I appreciate y'all for that and all that y'all have given me. So I guess the one sentence jewel I'll give is that when we teach folks who are masculine center, that it is okay to feel, that it is okay to express feelings and emotions, you are actually creating a safer world, not only for women and trans-identified folks and LGBTQ folks, but we're also creating a safer world for men as well and young boys. So you have as much of a stake as a man in this as at protecting women, as making sure that women are safe, but also making sure that you yourself and other men are safe as well. That's the jewel that I'll put in this space.
Q?
Yeah, I would just say we got to be in conversation. You know, this is one step, you know, single gender conversations, but then we got to bring people together, and then we have to kind of practice, you know, how we want to be treated, you know, and I think, you know, love is the answer to sexual violence. Love is the answer to IPV, all these different things that we're talking about, and we have to be in practice of it. And, you know, being in conversation, I think people always say, well, what's the action? What's the 5 steps? You know, it's no 5 steps. You know what I mean? It's a lifetime of being in practice with each other. And so I'll leave it at that, you know, and all of us, we have organizations, and check us out for more information, you know, websites, social media. But I would just kind of say again, you know, we got to love each other, and we got to be different, and let 2020, you know, the example of 2020 with these intersecting pandemics of, you know, systemic racism, IPV, health disparities, you know, all these issues that we had to kind of deal with at the same time. It changed who we are as men, as fathers, as parents, as men and women. It's totally different now. So we have to kind of really work together, parent together, amicably, and kind of, you know, view ourselves as men. Like Ted said earlier, we got to redefine who we are as men and be more in partnership. I'll end with that.
So before I get to you, Ted, and guys, the chat is blowing up. So when's part 2? You know, this guy, I don't know. I think Mike is on. He might be listening. We may have to come back for the part 2, because folks is out there loving this, and I love what they're saying. And great job, and Al got a lot of love for you, man, on the chat. You know, Ted, they always know you're expert. Q, they got some thumbs up for you, Q, and 11. And I think we gotta have, I don't know. So we have to maybe have a part 2 coming up. But Dave, put it back to Ted. So I want Ted to be able to have a word first before we get ready to jump off. I know we got to close out. Go ahead, Ted.
It's just my honor to be here with you, brothers. Iron sharpening iron, as we say, right? And I would just say we want to increase and promote healthy manhood. And as we increase and promote a healthy manhood, we'll decrease and prevent domestic violence, sexual assault, sexual harassment, bullying, homophobia, heterosexism. It'll all go away, and we'll be healthier and better as a result of it, man.
Okay, I see Mike on, so Mike said, yes. Thanks, Mike. So first of all, Alvaro, I want to even get to, and I'm sorry we didn't get to, because I want to bring out the word Dovo. And I want to, if we can just hold on for a little bit second. Alvaro, can you talk a little bit about being a Dovo? Because I think part of this work that we're doing now, and some things we talked about, we have to get to that part also. And I know for many of you who are online, you never ever heard the word Dovo. But Alvaro, can you explain it for us real quickly, and so we can get a better understanding of that word?
Yeah, it's thanks, Scott. It's an acronym, DARVO. It's DARVO, and it's an acronym that stands for deny, attack, and then reverse, victim, offender. And it's essentially just an acronym that describes a framework basically of when a man, particularly a man with lots of power, whether it be, you know, political power, money, power, whatever it might be, power in their community, through the church or through a community leader, is accused of sexual violence. There's a pattern that particular researcher found and saw, and I think it rings true for all of us, of that pattern of the first thing is that person will deny all wrongdoing whatsoever. And as we find out in a lot of these cases, most of these cases, there was wrongdoing, there was sexual harassment, there was sexual violence, and then so the deny part, and then you attack the person who's accusing you. So then essentially it reverses the whole victim offender situation, where at the end of the day I make myself the victim because I've been falsely accused of something, and the person who is coming out as a survivor is now the offender. That's something folks can read up about. It's something I stumbled upon, honestly. I haven't seen much of it, but I was just reading and researching, and I saw that, and I thought it clicked immediately. And the fact that it clicked immediately without me researching this, right, said, okay, there's something to this, obviously, because I just saw a bunch of cases pop in my head. I was like, oh, that's exactly what happened. And at the end of the day, in these cases, the woman who was the survivor, who was trying to get some accountability, trying to get some justice, ended up being dragged to the mud, and then they now have, they've been sort of labeled as some kind of offender. So yeah, if folks have a chance to check it out, it's just interesting. And if I could just say one thing on the sort of parting words, was that I want to go back to what I think all the panelists said at some point, but really it's at the prevention level, right? Culture, part of culture change is repetition, right? So if you see somebody wearing one pair of sneakers, that's not going to cause a culture change. But you see 3,000 people wearing the same sneakers, you're like, oh, this is cool. This is a new fashion. This is a trend. Now I want the sneakers, right? I think it's the same with everything. If we constantly just in our own little circles and spheres of influences are interrupting, being like, no, that's not cool. No, don't say that. No, that offends me. No, this, that happens enough, right? It changes the culture, right? And then we have other men going on and saying the same things to their friends, right? And that's real work, right? Don't discount from that. And it's hard. It's hard. I'm doing it with my friends, with my brothers and my family, and it's hard. It's hard because you're going to bump up against. It's going to create tension, right? But again, that's part of the work. So
Alvaro, I really want to thank you, because I know that you and I talked, and it's really helped me even pull this group together. Some conversations we had, so I appreciate the love that you've given me and allowed me to talk and to you about some things, and maybe to educate myself. So thank you for being here. Thank you for co-hosting with us, and Jerry. So I want to get your parting words, and next week, Jerry don't know it yet, but Jerry's in charge next month. But he's the lead, he's running the show next month. I'm gonna be in the back. I'm gonna be over there with Jerry's seat as being quiet. But Jerry, so go ahead, Jerry. Go ahead.
No, I think all the panelists, you all were amazing. It was a pleasure and honor to be at the barbershop. I say this to everybody listening, especially to men: empower vulnerability, right? Like create that space that it is actually cool to be vulnerable, to open up yourselves in that safe relationship. Start at home, build relationships up, just piggybacking on what Alvaro said, because it's literally one relationship at a time, modeling one person at a time. So just empower vulnerability so we can get to that space where we respect all. And just thank you all. You guys just dropped some gems that I got opportunity to take away with. So thank you.
Scott, before we go, I do have to plug Denim Day. I don't want to leave. I don't want us to end without that. Please, everyone that tuned in today, go to denimday.nyc. You can just type it in like that. It's going to take you to the Denim Day homepage. Check out the calendar. Tomorrow, April 28th, is Denim Day in New York. There's, I think, like 4 different events that you can, virtual events that you can participate in. Please check it out. It's on their virtual calendar on the website, denimday.nyc.
Dave, do we have a picture of that flyer? Because I think we're circling around. Maybe you can put it up as I close out. So final thoughts. What keeps coming to me as part of the final thoughts is that we have to understand, as people in our humanity, we have much more things in common than we have not in common. We have to find a way of looking at all the great common things we have and using that as a way of building humanity. Because at the end of the day, we're all human and we all need to be together. And you know what? It starts with the man in the mirror. So I have to look at myself and say, where can I start being human? Where can I start being a better man? What skills and techniques are jewels that I'm learning to be a better me? Because if I'm a better me, as the word said from, I think it's James Brown, we'll be in a better America. God bless, and I hope to see you all. And once again, we want to make sure you test positive, test negative, and stay positive. That's my word for the end of the day. Test negative and be positive. Good night, y'all. See you next month. Where hopefully a topic that I think we're going to be talking about next month, like Jerry's going to be taking care of. We're going to be talking about mental health. And we have some more conversation with that. I want to thank Q. I want to thank Ted. Ted, really, I owe you so much because this channel got started because of the work that we talked about last year around this time during the pandemic. We knew that the work that I called them in, we wanted to keep promoting it. And Alvarez, thank you, and tell everybody back at the mayor's office, we really appreciate having you and the work they're doing with Denim Day. And we want everybody to rally around. Al, you're going to come back, so don't go too far, okay? We're going to have you back because we have a lot of conversation. We want to keep the young guys involved, and I really appreciate it. And all those who are on, my co-workers who are on, I guess some friends from Ohio, some folks from Georgia, I guess some of them may be our family members that's on. I love you. I appreciate you. I thank you all for joining us. Until next time, see you at the barbershop.
See y'all. Take care.